Hello, and everyone, welcome. I want to definitely encourage you guys to bookmark some of these pages, but thank you for joining us today. I'm going to allow just a minute and give you a quick introduction to some information about our presentation today and our recording. And I'm looking forward to being able to share all the information with you as we go through the details about four-year college applications for the rising junior going into senior year class. And so we're going to take about an hour today to go through a few things. If we can make it shorter, we definitely will. I'm going to give us about 2 more minutes and pop back over to this other screen and make sure that we have everybody in that's going to be in. And this will be recorded if you're going to be watching this later. We'll be getting started here in just a minute. Once again, welcome. We're going to be covering some information for that rising class of 2022 in today's workshop. And before we get started, I want to highlight one important aspect of our presentation today. The live presentation and the recording will be available in English. And so if you're watching this or viewing the video, that's available on YouTube or Facebook after the fact, and Spanish is a better language for you. There are some numbers here on the screen that if you want to pause and write any of this information down. But Adela and or Angelica Stone, who work here directly at North Tahoe High School, will be able to spend some time and allow you to and be able to go through and understand a bit more about the presentation in your native language. And so if you would like this information in Spanish, don't hesitate to reach out. We will be happy to support you in that. The nature of live streaming is a little tough to do simultaneous translation with this information. So as we move forward with our information today, I do want to take a second and share with you a little bit of what we hope to cover in today's session. So part of the session, we're going to be going through an overview and a timeline and an idea of what best fit actually means in the world of college admissions counseling. And this is going to be specific primarily for four-year colleges, so universities and colleges across the country. And we'll highlight some differences between some of those. However, junior colleges, trade schools, that kind of stuff are all going to be slightly different. And so while you can definitely get some details about those other options by watching this, it will have a definite slant towards those four-year college processes. The next part is kind of more of the nitty-gritty of how actual applications will work, what are some important tips, tricks, and timelines in relation to the actual application process, which will begin this coming fall. And we'll go over some things to watch out for and some important different things about types of applications, for example. We'll talk about the impact of this last spring and COVID. And so there's some changes that have happened in relation to different processes and procedures, timelines, requirements, and such that are coming on the coattails of the COVID pandemic. And so we'll highlight a few things about, things that you need to know about the whole implications of COVID, because clearly we have not had a normal year in the last 15 months. And that's the case for many students, and some were more normal than others. And so we'll highlight kind of some important attributes about that. and then some tips and best practices in relation to applying for colleges and understanding how things work. And so there's a couple assumptions that we need to make with relation to our last year and coming out of junior year in mostly your class of 2022, junior year mostly in hybrid, and part of your 10th grade year as well. And so we do have to continue with the idea that there are certain unknowns that are going to be unavoidable in today's circumstances. We do have to identify that and honor that. That's going to be something that will impact all students across the country. However, we are starting to see things move a little bit back towards normal, both here at school, but also in the college world. Schools are planning for on-campus instruction and housing in the fall, many of them. And there are going to be some lasting impacts. For example, there might be more hybrid type of classes. You might see less large lecture classes that might be moved maybe to an online format for the next year or two. And so for the rising class of 2022 and your first year of freshmen, so you'd be the fall of 2022 applicant class, that's going to be something that you have to keep in mind. And the hope is that we continue moving positively and things become quote unquote more back to normal in the ways that we want them to. But there will be lasting things that will continue on, and we'll talk about a few of the big ones today. But just make sure that you are keeping things up to date. Please pay attention to your emails. That's just a request from me. Email is a pretty frequent mode of communication for all of us at North Tahoe High School, but especially me, and that's between students and families. And so please do keep abreast of that and do ask questions. There's a lot of things that are different now. And so I want to make sure that you know that it's important for you to ask some questions about what we ended up doing. So that's a pretty important thing that we have going on. I want to take a minute and highlight a couple of resources that we already have available to us. And this is going to be something that I'll hit on several times throughout the presentation today. But a big part, and we talked with a good number of the class of 2022 in Mr. Everest's class, and I'm hoping to talk in Ms. Droski's class a little later this week. But we talked about a couple things and got a chance for the juniors to share with each other as well. And one of the things that I mentioned to them was that it's going to take a lot of work. I think everyone is aware of that. But it's not always glamorous work. All right. It's not super flashy. And part of the process that we're going into is this research phase. And part of that means spending time. And this is a great place to actually spend some time. Later on in the presentation, I'm going to actually pull up my browser and be able to show you a little bit about this counseling website and some of the resources that I have in there for you. And that is definitely a great place to start. And we'll show you how to access those. One thing that you might want to particularly look for in the bottom right-hand corner of the presentation you have on the screen is something called the College Counseling Handbook. That is something that we are going to be referencing throughout the year, and we have some catch-up to do. So I also recognize that. This is something that we have typically spent quite a bit of time in our junior pathways class talking about a number of these elements and preparing for senior year. And the class of 2022 missed out on quite a bit of that. Okay, so we are going to have to build in a couple things that are going to be an important element to build back into the process. The next thing is we are going to spend some time talking about fit. Okay, and fit is a very important term in relation to college. Okay, and it's a little bit contrary to some things, but this fit kit is provided by an organization called Capex, and it's got a lot of great resources available to you. There's a link on here, but it's also linked directly on the North Tahoe High School Counseling website, and you can access that at any time that you would like. And so I would encourage, that's a great summer opportunity, or even right now, is to respond, and it's got a lot of prompts and areas to write and think. And that's really kind of the phase many of our juniors, rising seniors are in, is this phase of defining what does a college fit actually look like and from which direction. And it provides some great leading questions. Another area that you can actually take a look at is something that I recorded about a month or two ago, but it's highlighting the things that juniors should know. Okay, and that's the bottom left image that you see. This is available right here on YouTube if you're watching this on YouTube. But if you're not, I would heavily encourage you to hop over to YouTube and look up the North Tahoe High School channel. Make sure you subscribe because you get notifications about new videos or when we're live for meetings like this. But you can also look at through the different playlists we have. We have frequently asked questions. We have all of the meetings that we run typically are recorded and available for later viewing, as well as just other kind of important tutorials or tips or tricks. And this Things Junior Should Know goes into some details about some of this information, but maybe from that larger, broader perspective. All right. And so I want you to take a minute and watch some of that. Before we dive into the elements of fit, okay, so I want to highlight just some pretty important items that a lot of rising seniors are thinking of, but not necessarily taking action on. So a lot of the stuff that we see every day with our rising seniors is this perpetual waiting game. Of it's important. I know that it's important. It's actually stressing me out. That's how important it is. But procrastination is getting the best of me. That is something that we definitely see every single day. And so as we do that, it's pretty important that this process starts now. Okay, is it the end of the game if it doesn't? No. Okay, there are upcoming deadlines, and deadlines are a real thing with the world of college. However, there is time. However, it's also getting shorter every single day that goes by. And so it's something that we definitely encourage students to jump right in, make this an opportunity for the summertime to really dive into this, because waiting even another month or two, what it's actually going to do is twofold. One of them is going to make your senior year more stressful. And number two, it can potentially negatively impact your performance in some of these college applications in terms of being prepared and presenting your best self. We'll talk more about why that's important here in a second too. However, in the world of college admissions, there's two main things one main thing that we really have shifted from this idea of one main thing, kind of like looking at it one directionally, but this idea of fit. And most college advisors, most college admissions professionals, private college counselors, and school counselors have all bought into this idea, and it really does create an appropriate and approachable list of schools if we follow this kind of method. And the idea of fit, it really places a large emphasis on the needs and wants of the student. Many times when we talk about a college application process or finding colleges, we're looking at where the student might fit the college's needs and wants. So colleges also have needs and wants. But it leaves off this idea of what students need to be a successful human, a successful community member, a successful academic student in their college classes. And that is something that's pretty crucial for not only the success academically, but their happiness on campus and their college persistence. So a couple examples of some pretty big and pretty sometimes overlooked items in elements of fit are location and size. Okay, this is usually one of the bigger things that people think about. So location could be anywhere from I want to study abroad and go to school in another country to I think I want to stay on the West Coast, or I'd like to go to the East Coast, to more specifically, like I want to move to San Diego, or I'd like to live in Boston, or even just like kind of rough geographical areas. So that's going to be things like I want to attend a rural school or a suburban or urban school. And probably the more essential element of that is the why that follows. Okay, so identifying the idea of, the reasoning behind some of these elements of fit is determining why they matter to you and why they maybe should or should not matter more or less. Okay, so this idea of location and size, what about the West Coast attracts you? A lot of times people might say, I want to stay in California, and there might be a financial element to that, or proximity to home element to that. And that's something that we want to make sure that you take note of as you're looking at these elements, is don't just write down the elements, but write down notes about the reasons why and why you feel like they are a strong element of fit for you. Okay, because that's going to come into play later on down the road more than we might think. Size is also another big element, and that's something that is hard because it's all relative, right? It's all relative to our experience. When I ask students a lot of times, what is a typical size of a school? They might say, a large campus is like 1,000 kids. That's a big high school. That's actually probably more of a medium-sized high school, but it's big for us here at North Tahoe High School with 450 students. And so a large school is typically over 25,000 students, and that's the size of a small city. That's like pretty much North Tahoe all combined, the whole greater North Tahoe area. And so it's something just to think about is size in relation to that, as well as like location. How much have students lived in a city? Do they realize what traffic is and things like that? Other elements that are less thought of are going to be social or environmental interests or concerns. And so that's going to be something to pay close attention to. Political climate on campus, diversity, different things that they have access to, support for students of underrepresented backgrounds. Those are all things that students oftentimes maybe put to the bottom of their list, but actually make a big deal. When students end up back in Tahoe after attending school for a year or two and they don't continue, one of the big reasons why is often related not so much to academics. It's often related to the environmental elements of their experience on campus. They moved to LA, for example, and they didn't like sitting in traffic for an hour to travel 5 miles. And so, there's a lot of things that are just environmental where they just didn't feel happy. They didn't feel welcome or part of the community. And that's something just not to ignore. Then also academics. So like, how do things come across academically for students? What are their class sizes? What are the different graduation rates? So that's an important one that comes up later on with financial aid. But also like, how do they teach? Are there teachers there to teach, or are they there to do research? That's probably a big comparison between, say, the UC and UCSU system. While there are generalities, it is something that students do need to pay attention to it, because the UCs are there, their professors are often there. One of their main roles is not actually teaching. They do teach, but they do research. They research their specialty. And on the CSU end of things, many times they're maybe doing some research on the side, but it's not a main component of their job as a teaching professor. And so those are some different elements. And you might have some students that really want that theoretical approach and some want more of that hands-on access to teachers and things like that. And that's okay, but it's just knowing that for yourself. So that's just a big element of that piece. The other thing that I want to highlight is if you think of this process as a job interview. All right, so that's another way to look at it. And I know many high school students may not have had a true kind of in-depth job interview maybe in the past, but maybe if you've had, you can maybe relate. But parents, maybe you can, having job interviews. But typically we think of the company interviewing us. Do we make the cut? And that does happen in the college admissions process. The colleges are going to evaluate and judge us. Are we the best candidate for their limited positions? And so that's something that, we're looking at, and the college will be looking at your preparation. So have you taken, the quote unquote right classes? How have you performed in those classes? What other things have you done with your experience here at the high school? The other side of that coin is you interviewing the company. If you're in a place that you're lucky enough to not have to take the first job that's available to you to fill a need, you really should understand, do I agree with their company's policies, procedures, and what they stand for? Do I have places that I feel like I can go to? Or am I able to extend myself into a future area of growth for me? Do I feel like I fit in with the culture? And is it somewhere I can see myself in 5 years? Okay, those are all questions that many people will have. And most people would say that if you went through a job interview and you didn't really ask yourself those things, you might not be doing a very good job. And so those are things that I don't want you to ignore about your college application process. There are a few helpful tools, and the things that you see on the screen are a few resources that are available to you. I do have any of these books that you see up here, so Fisk's Guide to Colleges, Rugg's Recommendations, all those two are also, I have copies of those here in my office that I'm happy to loan out. They're physical books. They're about 3 inches 3 inches thick each, so they're a little bit intimidating, but it provides a lot of great information available for students and families. And one of the biggest things about some of these resources is maybe not even identifying the resources to understand schools you're familiar with, but making connections to the schools that you might not even be aware of yet that are great fits for you. Big Future is another website that's available for students to do some of this research on, and that's a product of College Board, who runs the SAT and AP program, and has some great resources and also news articles and blogs that you can read as well. And then Naviance Supermatch is another great tool, and that's embedded with the Naviance program that we offer through the school. And if I haven't been in yet, I'll be showing students specifically how to do that. I know I've done that with a couple of the English classes here in the last month or two, but it's definitely a great resource, and that's another tool that is great for extending your list of schools, and so finding schools that meet those elements of fit for you. In the world of the college application process, there are members of your team, and it's important to know that we all have distinct roles. Okay, we all are part of this team, but I think everyone tries sometimes to play a different role than they're intended to, myself included even. And so it's something that we just have to kind of revisit and remind ourselves of from time to time. Okay, the main thing is that the student, okay, the senior sitting in the chair, is the person that's really driving this process. Okay. You as a senior, if you're watching this, you're the person that's going to be making decisions and also making things happen. Okay, if we made an analogy to a sport, okay, you would be the player that's actually in the game making everything work. Okay, we're the coach, the athletic director, the marketing person, like the people that are supporting every other piece around you without actually doing things. Okay. And so family and parents, if you're watching this, you're probably one of the biggest cheerleaders, and you're also the typically funding sources for many students. And so that's something for you to understand and recognize, is that your student will have to partner with you throughout the year. But please don't do things for your child. Okay. Number one is it takes away an epiphany. This is a great opportunity for your student to learn. Okay. A step towards that true independence. Okay, it's scary. Don't get me wrong. I don't have a senior yet. I've worked with hundreds of seniors, but I don't have one. My youngest son right now is 5, and I don't understand exactly what that feels like, but I can empathize. But it is scary. This is a big defining moment for many students and families as well. But it's something that I want to highly, highly encourage you. Do not take that opportunity away from your child. Okay, I've seen what happens when that's the case, and we don't want you living vicariously through them. And one way to know that is if I'm receiving more emails from you than your child, that's a decent indicator that you might be acting more like the secretary than you want. Okay, so definitely, seniors are busy, I get it, but definitely make sure that that you're letting them take the reins. Okay, if they ask for help, great, try to help them as much you can, but then re-deliver that process back to them. And then we also have staff here, myself, Blanca, the registrar, teachers are all going to be working alongside students to help support them through this process. So it's important to identify who are some of your partners and allies throughout this. All right, and we are going to look at a rough timeline of what the senior year typically looks like. All right, and so kind of on the bottom rung that you see here, we have 9th grade through about now. So we've been working for the last 3.5 years or so to kind of get ready for this next phase. And I think that's partly what puts so much pressure on it is we've all kind of had this, like, it's like a Disneyland moment where we all are thinking about it, and sometimes we're thinking about it and we're scared. Sometimes we're thinking about it and we're excited, or some combination thereof. But it's a big thing that we've spent a lot of time, energy in to get to, and now it's actually going to happen. And so that's where some of that stress and anxiety can definitely come from. Okay, but 9th grade through now is really all about researching, planning, thinking, and potentially testing. And we'll talk more about that here in a second too, because there's some important differences and changes that will happen coming up in the fall. And that will continue, that 9th grade through now section will continue through the early fall of this coming year. So even through August is a great time. That's where I'm saying you still have time, but we're also running out. Around September of this coming year, through about December most typically, even though that's not necessarily a all-inclusive assumption, applications do continue after December. However, that's the most common time frame that students will actually apply to college, is when students will work on, complete, and submit all of their most of their college applications, if they're in that window. Okay. By November or December, students should generally finish any college types of testing that they are hoping to complete. Again, we'll talk more about that. But it's also, generally speaking, we'll talk more about financial aid here for just a few minutes down the road, but also it's a great time to understand this November, December is a wonderful target date to complete financial aid applications as well. So that's usually when most of our in-state four-year universities are due. So November 30th is generally the deadline, and it should be that for this coming school year. It was changed slightly for last year due to COVID and stuff, but we're anticipating it's the same November 30th deadline, for example, for our CSU and UC systems. Later on in the kind of fall and into the springtime, that we go into that financial aid window, and that financial aid is all the money that's available, both need and merit-based. Need-based aid is something that you don't impress people on. Okay, so like it's not something that someone awards you based on like how impressive your resume is or things like that. It's really based on information that that you have from your family, so your income or lack thereof, and all the in between. And so that's something that you should definitely complete. I encourage all students, and we will be spending a lot more time talking about this in the upcoming school year, because we do a decent job. Our seniors do a decent job of submitting their FAFSA or DREAM Act, but we want to improve that. There's a lot of correlation between going to school, being able to pay for school and that kind of stuff, and submitting these forms. The deadline for the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act for the most amount of free-based aid from the state is going to be March 2nd of 2022 for your class. And so that's just an important date. You want to make sure, like I said, that you get it in as early as possible generally, but that would be kind of your definite goal to have everything done. December through May, you'll mostly get scholarship applications coming your way, as well as start getting the decisions from the schools back, so if you get in or don't. And one thing I told the students when I was working with them in the history classes is that if you do a college application list, which is our next slide, well, generally speaking, it is okay if you get denied from a school or two. Even more than that sometimes. Like you might be cutting yourself short if you don't. And that's something that I think that's important. It's not expected that students get 100% success rate. I'm actually surprised when that happens. And so it's something that you have to kind of just prepare yourself mentally for that there's a decent chance that we'll get denied. And I say we as in everyone kind of feels denied when the student is denied. And so we all kind of take that hit, but it's okay. All right. So it's not the goal. The goal is to get into a few schools that give you some options down the road. So that's why we have you apply to a couple different options. And so what we see here on the screen is a rough outline of how we suggest things work. All right, so this is kind of a loosely agreed upon quote unquote formula. It is by no means a hard and fast rule. You can go above, you can go below, you can change the numbers here, but what this formula kind of spells out, and the importance of it is that it's okay to have some reach schools. Reach schools would be defined as schools that are either very highly selective overall or highly selective for students, say in your kind of like performance range. Okay, so where it might be something where you're kind of stretching beyond where you might be comfortable, in that wheelhouse of getting in based on your grades or GPA or different attributes that you're able to bring to the table. Okay, pretty much anything below like a 20% admissions rate would probably be a reach school for many students. And so that's something you don't want a list of reach schools only. It's about diversity, and you want diversity from an application standpoint where you don't want everything in one basket where you might only get one flavor of admissions results. The middle one are meet or fit, and that's really kind of where you're meeting or are in a good place in terms of your admissions profile. And that might mean your test scores or your GPA or classes you've taken. You feel like you're in a pretty decent range. And these are going to be, probably hopefully the largest area of your application. This is where that research comes into play, and finding the information from Naviance or Big Future colleges about what is the average GPA of admissions. If you're taking test scores, what is the average SAT score, something like that. And then 1 to 3 schools of expected or likely. We don't use the word safety anymore. No school is safe. Every school can deny you. And so expected or likely is typically schools where you might actually be above and more admissible than kind of the bulk of the applicants. And those are schools that you're more likely to get into. Underneath there, you can actually see, though, it's important that all schools are first choice schools. And what I mean is, please don't apply to schools, and parents, this is particularly, and guardians, and this is particularly important for you. Don't make your student apply to schools that they have no intention of going to, just because it's going to pad your ego. Okay, that is not useful time. Okay, it's something that we want to make sure that students are all applying to schools that they would be happy to go to no matter what. If they only got into one single school, it might not be their first out of their ranked choice list, but it's a first choice school that's on their list. All right, and that's what that means. Is I want students to, clearly they might have a first choice of that list, if they would have their, their choice of the lot, but ultimately if they got denied to all of them but one, it's important that they know that they have an option that they would be happy and successful at. So let's talk a little bit about application types. There's some different ones. I'm going to highlight a few of the most commonly used ones, and the rest of them are something that maybe we can talk about later if you're applying to one that's that we don't cover today. Probably the biggest one that we use here at North Tahoe High School across the board is the UC application and the CSU Apply application. Those are two separate applications, and down towards the second to bottom one is where that's listed. Those are the most frequent ones our students use, and you'll see in the quotations in the description that it's a common app, little c, little a, okay? Because there is such thing as a big C, big A common app, formal title, formal organization. Okay, but the UC application and the CSU application are little c, little a common apps, because for the UC application, you're actually going to be filling out one single app and then using it to apply to any of the CSU, or I'm sorry, the UCs that you're applying to. And the same thing with the CSU Apply system. You will be using that for the 23 different CSUs if you're going to be applying to multiple ones. So you're not filling out multiple versions of the application. You're going to fill it out once. There might be a few fine-tuning pieces and questions that are specific for an individual campus that you might answer at the very end of the process, but everything pretty much is universally applied to any application within those systems. Okay, so that's the UC and CSU applications, and we'll spend more time on that in the fall in terms of that, and I'll have a couple more tips in the future on filling those applications out. But going back to the top of this screen is the big C, big A common application. So that's a formal nonprofit organization. They have over 900 and probably closer to 1,000 schools or more by this year. And those are mostly going to be private or out-of-state public institutions. You're not going to find UCs, you're not going to find CSUs in that common application. And the benefit of doing that is if you're filling out a number of school applications, in the olden days you'd have to go through and fill out multiple duplicitous applications to submit. And what they found was most of the information was pretty similar. So a bunch of people got together and said, let's make this application that students can fill out once, and then add some more information to that we want as a specific school. And so this big common application is something that students will fill out if they're applying to some private schools or out of states, which I do suggest. We're not going to talk about that specifically at this session, but it's for the short explanation. I think all students should have a private school or two on their application list. Even though the sticker price might be high and you might not get the aid package, you never know, and you very well might. Sometimes they're actually cheaper, and we'll talk more about and give you some examples about that during our financial aid session in the fall. But I don't want you to rule out private schools simply because of the cost at this point. But many students will fill out the common application as well. One important thing about that is that does have often letters of recommendation required as part of that application, as well as more long form essays. And so it is something that there's two main components. One is the general or standard common application form that will go to all schools that you apply to. And then once you add colleges to your common app, they might add what's called institutional specific things that they want. It might be short questions, it might be an extra essay or two. There might be some additional things that students have to fill out once they add a school to their common application for that application cycle. The next one is at the very bottom. The ones school specific is really just kind of like what I said the old days was for the private schools. So that a good example would be, say, Montana State. Montana State has a school specific application. Typically that's going to be fairly it's usually on the shorter side, not always, but they're going to be applying directly through their school, that college's website, and many times they're going to ask only school specific questions. So they might skip some of the stuff that you would see on a common app. And that's most useful if you're only going to apply, if you're applying to mostly CSUs, UCs, you're going to add one out of state or one private school. Sometimes you might want to think about looking for a school specific application, because it can be sometimes shorter and maybe even free. And so that's just something to pay attention to. The last one at the very bottom is relatively new, and it's called the Coalition app. There are a few schools around the country, Washington University, or University of Washington, University of Maryland, and there's a few other ones. I want to say University of Florida or something like that, that do require the use of this. However, I would heavily encourage you to not use this application. It is not super well received among most people, and while if you have to use it, it's something that we do support. I would encourage you to use the Common App over the Coalition app if you have a choice. Just the platform, the system is more robust on the Common App, and there's a lot of things that kind of get shoved in there in the Coalition app that I feel like are not super supportive of students. And I would encourage you to look at that and avoid it if you can and have a choice. There are a couple things that when you're applying, and this is typically, I'll try to call out a couple things that you might notice, but on the screen what you'll see is there are some details about how students apply. And so what you see are 5 different columns. And on the left side of the screen are 3 columns that are under this non-restrictive application plan. And what that means is non-restrictive means you can apply anywhere, they don't limit anything, and it's totally up to you. The far left one is probably the most common option that you'll see. This would be your kind of standard college application. Okay, you apply within, application starts on this date, you apply by a certain date when the application closes, the school then takes all their results and then notifies you by a certain date, usually later on in the spring. That would be regular decision. Okay, that's going to be something that you'll see pretty broadly. The next one over to the right is rolling admissions. And what that means, UNR is a good example of that. Montana State's another good example of rolling admissions. What that means is students, they will open up a window of application, but ultimately a student can apply at the very beginning or the very end, and usually within a couple weeks after you apply, I mean, Montana State's often the week after you apply, you typically get an admissions notice. And that's kind of nice in some sense, in that you can kind of, like, if you apply to a rolling admissions school, you can actually have results back in a school that you're admitted to pretty quick. So that's something that you can look forward to in doing that. But ultimately, they will actually start processing your application as soon as you submit it, typically, or within several days, and oftentimes notify students much earlier than, say, a regular decision notification date might be in the spring. The next one over, EA, you'll see a lot of acronyms. I'll try to call out what the acronyms mean, but EA stands for early action. Early action is essentially you as the student will put in the work and submit by an earlier deadline for an earlier notification of admissions or denial. Okay, there's a couple distinct notes about early action. Okay, and I'll come back to that, but I want to explain early decision first because they are kind of sometimes looked at similarly. On the right side of that black bar, you see 2 restrictive application plans. Early decision, these are restrictive, means that you have several limitations and several requirements when you do these. One of the requirements is typically that you can only do these at certain places, and it's often only at one place. Okay, and the other thing is that if you do these, for example, early decision, what early decision means is you can apply to one school early decision, and when you do, they're going to notify you earlier, but then you have to withdraw all other applications and immediately place a deposit and plan on attending that school. So there's a couple factors that you have to take in mind. Number one is this school should be 150% your first choice. You can't be wishy-washy on this. Okay, it's something that if you apply early decision, you're signing a legal binding agreement that if we admit you, you're going to attend. Okay, and they ask you to place an immediate deposit. They tell you you have to withdraw all other applications, and you can only apply to one school early decision. Okay, if you are applying early decision, that is something that I will ask you about, and there's actually a certification form that I have to sign that says we had that conversation. There is some financial aid impacts as well. You don't always know exactly how much your financial aid package will be when you apply early decision. All right, and sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. There's some competing information that sometimes when you apply early decision, they might not have quite as much of an incentive to offer maybe a larger scholarship amount or things like that, because they know that you really want to come. And so it is something just to be a little bit cautious about. You have to really know about yourself and your own wants, but also you have to know that this is a for sure thing. And if financially it comes back wildly different, many times schools will let you out of an early decision agreement. But sometimes it's not going to be if it's a couple $1,000s off. They're not going to necessarily let you out of that easily, at least. And that's the main difference between early action. Early action means you're not going to, you put in the time early, okay, but you're not going to have any major benefit other than earlier notification. Okay, you're not getting an admissions bump. Early decision, you potentially might. And so it could be enough to put you over that I got in to I didn't get in hump. In early decision, the main reason is college admissions officers are looking for students who are going to arrive in the fall. And when you apply early decision, it's a guaranteed student that's going to be coming. And so they have an obligation and a financial responsibility at their institution to meet their admissions criteria and their numbers. They actually have a word for it called yield. And that yield number is very important because just because a school sends out admissions notices, every student that's admitted does not come to that school and ultimately accept that offer admissions. And so they have a lot of data and data numbering and mining and crunching and that kind of stuff to understand the math behind how many admits to offer, what is their yield rate, meaning how many students come from that admissions class and actually enroll. Okay. If they over enroll, that's a problem. If they under enroll, that's a problem. So they have to, they're in a very exact science. It's not as simple as a lot of other things might always seem to be. The other thing would be restrictive early action. That would be something that you might see at, say, Stanford or other places. And that typically means that you may not, they're not limiting your ability to decide to attend, but they will be limiting your ability to apply other places early. Okay, and so that's something that your commitment's not binding, but you're agreeing that this is the only school I'm applying early to. All right, and so really the only legally binding one that you have to place deposit, withdrawal, all that stuff is that early decision. Okay, and that's a big deal. So it's something I would encourage you to talk with me more about as you start looking at some of these different options. So a couple key application tips, and we'll talk a little bit about testing. So please do review your applications multiple times. This is your one shot. All right. If you submit and there's an error, you put a number in your name. Will that ruin your application? Most likely not, but it's better to not have that happen. Okay. We want to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward. And it's definitely good to have several people review it before you submit. It is much better to have an extra person look at it versus submitting it early. Okay. A lot of people will rush it, get it looked at once and then submit it, with several weeks to go. It doesn't typically help you anything at 99% of the schools to rush and submit earlier in a window than closer to a deadline. Okay, it will help you immensely if you make sure that everything is correct and it's been reviewed multiple times. Okay, make sure that you do, and this is something that I tell parents, don't get involved in the writing of the essays early on. It's easy to tell. We can tell when parents have touched it too much. All right, so students, complete all first drafts of essays before letting anybody else look at it. Okay, we want to make sure that writing stays true to you. We don't care what your parents think. We don't care what your teacher thinks. We don't even care what Mr. Ream thinks. We want to know what you want. Okay, the deadlines do matter. Nortel High School and sometimes our district has some looser deadline policies that we sometimes do on purpose, sometimes unintentionally. Okay, but deadlines in college are matter. If it says 11:59 p.m. on November 30th, it means 11:59 p.m. on November 30th, and you better ask, do you mean Pacific time or East Coast time? Okay, because that will literally shut off your application, and if you miss it, you miss it, and that's typically drop dead. They're not going to make any exceptions. Okay, so you also need to make sure you plan ahead. Servers go down, applications crash, and sometimes they make exceptions for that. Other times they don't. They just say you should have applied earlier. Tough luck. And so it's just something that it depends on the circumstance, but you definitely want to plan ahead. I would always, like, for example, our UCCSUs right around Thanksgiving time. Typically I say try to get everything done by Thanksgiving, and then you can have 2 or 3 days off to kind of relax. Next is honesty. You definitely need to be honest on all things, including your FAFSA. Don't exaggerate or blow things up or falsify information or finances or community service hours. Okay, chances are, in relation to applications, they're probably not going to check on it, but they very well could. Sometimes I've seen different things that came in a letter that someone told a teacher about something, and I was like, that didn't happen. And so it does sometimes cause question and can cause issues. And finally, pay attention. Okay, you are responsible. You, the student, are responsible for checking your email, checking your portals. If you miss things, that's on you. We can't help you on that. We don't know how schools want things, you are responsible for that communication piece. Ignorance is not bliss in this process. So let's talk a little bit about testing. Testing has changed. The idea behind testing is it's a universal comparison tool, all right, where grades and test scores, or grades and GPAs and activities and things that are available in your community all change depending on where you live. The idea of standardized tests is that word standardized, is that we can statistically norm results and achievement between people across the country and around the world, all right? So students that are taking SATs or ACTs, they are used generally interchangeably, and so students don't have to take one or the other. Many of our students, if they choose to test at this point, oftentimes gravitate more towards the SAT simply because many of our other school programs are based on that similar kind of breadth of tests within the College Board, like AP or PSAT exams. And most students would need scores by about November, December. So usually that November test date is one of the last ones that students would be able to sit for in their senior year, depending on their application type. Sometimes if you're applying early, restrictive early action, early decision, you might need an earlier score because they will not be considering those later scores in the fall. However, there are a number of big changes that this last year has really kind of created for us. And I like to think of it as a true opportunity more than anything else. And so that's something that as we look at the landscape of testing, you really have to think for yourself if this is something that you value. Okay, there's a couple of reasons why. There's over almost 1,500 schools that are now officially test optional. Okay, and just to be clear, test optional means you can choose. If you see a test optional school, they are going to say if you have a test score, you can apply with that and we'll consider that in your application. If you don't, or you do not want to submit a test score, you can do that as well, and we're going to consider your application without it. Okay, they say they can make comparisons like for like. Okay, it's all about a big picture and package, right? So it might if you don't have a test, they'll look at the other attributes of your application more closely. If you have a test score, they might factor that into some of that numbering and in comparison tools. So you really have to kind of know that for yourself. There's very few schools in the country now that will actually require this. Your service academies, I think the Texas university system still requires it, as does I think some of the Florida university systems. Okay, not schools that generally our students broadly apply to. Okay, but you do have to know that if you have to have a test score. But I would venture for almost all of our seniors, you're either going to be test optional, meaning you can, or test blind. Test blind means even if you have a score, we're not going to consider that. And that is what our CSU and UC systems, both all schools within those university systems, which are the largest amount of schools where our students apply and attend, are test blind for the class of 2022. Meaning, even if you have a test score, they're not looking at it for admissions. Okay, they could potentially use things later on down the road once you're in for placement and things like that. But generally, if you're going to take the test, you're hopefully going to be a decent test taker, and you probably, in my guess, won't need that placement information. All right, so that's just an important thing. Fair Test is an organization that gathers information about the different schools that are test optional or test blind, and they're a good place to check to see what your schools you're considering have come out and said that they will be considering for the fall of 2022 application cycle. All right, so that's an important thing. I'm happy to answer questions on that later, but we're going to move right along and talk briefly about finances. College is expensive. It's an investment, and that's really the mindset I want you to think about. But ultimately, it is something that as you go through financial aid, it's an important factor to consider, okay? But it's not the sole factor that you should pay close attention to at the beginning of this process. And the reason being, we reverse shop in college in the United States. It is something that we want to make sure that you pay attention to and maybe jot down what is the average cost of attendance at these individual schools. But just know that we don't actually know what that cost will look like until we get in and get a financial aid award letter back from them explaining that. Okay, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's right on the line, right what we expected, and sometimes it's significantly less to go to a school. And that's where I'm saying it's okay to have a private school or several on your applications, because sometimes, believe it or not, private schools can even be cheaper than our in-state university systems. Okay, and so this is just a rough estimate from the U.S. News and World Report from 1920 school year, so roughly out of pocket costs. Okay, and so the rough tuition costs, and you have to factor in tuition and room and board. All right, so it is something that we just want to pay close attention to, but don't let it necessarily scare you away too much right away. So a couple things about financial aid that I want you to kind of also look at. So again, be realistic. It's like buying a house or car. You want to shop where it's appropriate. If you don't have the funding necessarily to for sure buy a Lambo, don't shop at the Lamborghini dealership alone. Okay, you want to shop around. All right, so that's where coming in and applying broadly, both from admissions and a financial aid standpoint, is encouraged. There are a number of places to get estimates. There's something called the Fafsa Forecaster if you want to know what your EFC might be, as well as each major school out there is going to have a cost of attendance calculator. You definitely want to apply to scholarships, okay, both through the college, completing your FAFSA, as well as through our school system. We just awarded over $500,000 our community to graduating seniors last week. And that is something that students, believe it or not, some students did not choose to apply. And definitely, if you apply, you're probably going to get some money. And some of it's significant, $50,000, $60,000 a year at times. Okay, I would say the most common award is a couple $1,000s. All right, but if you apply, good chance you'll probably get something. We actually had a hard time giving away a few awards because they're very specific. Please ask questions. This goes for students and families. I don't always have the answers, and some things I can't really advise on, like where should I put my money and stuff like that. I'm not a financial advisor, but I'm happy to understand more about, help you understand more about what financial aid looks at. How does it work? Maybe what might be coming my way. Okay, and again, observe deadlines, very, very important. Okay, the number one mistake that people make, though, is not submitting an application. So we are going to be focusing on that more next year. Historically, only about 3/4 of students at Nortel High School who are seniors complete the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act. So we had about 104 graduates last week at graduation. So about 26 of them didn't apply. Okay, and 75% is not a poor number. I would say that's a strong financial aid submission, but I think it could be better, and I think there's a lot of reasons why. So we're going to spend some time encouraging and supporting this process next year more than we have in the past, especially given the past 15 months that we've had. There's going to be probably more questions given the life changes that maybe people have experienced. So expect some more information about completing FAFSAs and that kind of stuff as we go forward in the next year. We talked about diversity and asking for help. Okay, and it's important to also apply even if you think that you won't qualify for need-based aid. And this is probably one of the reasons why some people don't actually submit a FAFSA or California DREAM Act, is because the impression is maybe we won't qualify for anything. And very well, you might not. Okay, so I want to be clear there. You might not qualify for things. However, when you do apply, many times some of these merit, the need-based is based on your finances for your family. The merit-based aid is based on all the impressive things that you can do, from SAT scores to GPA or class submission, to sports or music or things like that are more kind of sometimes thought about. Sometimes they need those FAFSA results to qualify you. I can tell you that our local scholarship applications do. Okay, for us to award those financial aid and scholarship awards, when the committee's looking at it, they're looking at EFC, what you get from the FAFSA. So it's definitely helpful in those merit-based applications as well. The other thing is that the FAFSA, the California DREAM Act, or this last acronym on the bottom left that you see is the CSS profile. That is a program from the College Board that you'll see for about 200 or 300 schools that are pretty highly selective and very expensive. You do want to pay attention if that's you, that you're applying to some of those schools. It's something to know. And we'll talk more about that in the fall in our financial aid specific section and workshop. But it's something that all those applications, all they do is provide information to colleges. The colleges are the one that actually look at what you qualify for, package up a financial aid award letter, and actually award you what you will get to help offset the cost of college, maybe through different sources. But the application itself doesn't actually award you anything. The college will. The application informs the college on what you actually get. So some of the tips and tricks that I would suggest: how do we get through senior year as painless as possible? Okay, there's a number of things that I would encourage you to pay close attention to, and as we go into the tail end of this presentation, just know that we will have more meetings in the fall as we get back into school, both in person, knock on wood, and virtually, and typically we do broadcast our in-person sessions if you're not able to attend. But we will, I warned the rising seniors, and I'm going to warn you again. Senior year is busy, and it's information overload. So I want to make sure that you realize that. Please be aware that we're going to have information coming at you from left and right. We try to make it as digestible as possible. But there's a lot that you need to know. Okay, hour-long workshops are not unheard of. Okay, we try to, make sure that we spend your time wisely, but it's definitely something that you have to invest your time and energy into to get the most benefit from it. So starting early is a big deal. Okay, so lowering that stress of the senior year is to do that process now. So right now is a prime opportunity to really, if you haven't, to get started. And if you have started, to continue working on some of the things that you need to kind of start that, get back in the fall ready to rock and roll with applications. And so a good target would be to have a pretty refined list of schools that you think you might like to apply to, that you can still continue refining when we get back in the fall. But we should, expand the list by our research and then start whittling down that list from, 20 or 30 schools that are like initial interests to actual, these are schools I might actually end up applying to in kind of that 7 to 12 range by the time you're in middle of September. You also want to find any meaningful volunteer work, intern work, and this is important because one is not a lot of students had this experience in the last year, but number two is work experience. You do not need to pay for fancy volunteer work. You don't need this I'm going to cure cancer with this internship. Working is a valuable summer experience. Caring for siblings is a valuable summer experience. Okay, colleges recognize that not every student has the ability to go volunteer. They might have to work to support your family or support yourself. You might have to take care of your siblings. Those are all important things that teach you important skills. So do not discount work experience, child care, supporting your family, helping around the house. Those things are also very important, but you have to pay attention to them. Okay, you have to understand and really think about, what did I learn? What skills did I practice when I'm doing those things? Okay, and I want to highlight that quality over quantity and being consistent is better than bouncing around. Okay, so just pay close attention there. Again, continue researching. Get together if you feel safe and are able to do so with friends. Like maybe you guys share some common schools. Split up some of the work of kind of the tedious research elements and make sure that you do write it down. Okay, I'm going to show you a place that I've created that you can do that. That will be helpful, but writing things down is important because students often will spend the hour or so researching like I asked them to. And then I talk to them a couple weeks later about it and they're like, I don't remember a whole lot. I remember this school's on my list, but I don't remember why. So write things down. Okay, you want to invest the time, but you want to make sure that it's a process that's going to last multiple weeks and multiple months. So you're not going to be expected to remember all that stuff. Now is also a good time to actually understand what you might need. So as you're going through and developing that list, keep track of, do I need a letter of recommendation to apply to this particular school? Will I need to write some essays? Because that's stuff you want to kind of plan ahead of for a little bit as we get into the fall. And then also plan on starting the senior profile, which is available online now, that you might have actually started sometimes and maybe in your English class at this point. But that's something that's a great summer opportunity as well. And just so you know, the senior profile, it's a brag sheet. It asks some pointed questions, and it is a little bit of work. I don't intend it to be a whole monumental task. Like you don't have to write in paragraph format. I'm not checking spelling. Use bullets. Use if you have a resume that captures some of it, attach your resume. So it's not intended to be extra work, but it is very valuable to us as we write letters. So we can use Naviance as a tool, and I'm actually not going to go through this on this video in particular. I have a couple other videos on the YouTube channel that I've mentioned at the very beginning that you can look at. We'll also be spending some time, and we did also spend some time in the last couple of weeks with the junior class, and we will revisit that also in the fall. But there's a number of resources, and using Naviance, in particular, the Supermatch College Search is a great place for where many of the junior class actually are. Another thing that is very valuable is the counseling website. And in a second, I'll pop it up on the screen for you. But when you go up to the top, there's a section called College and Career Counseling. And what that's going to show you is this sheet you kind of see on the screen, and we'll actually pull it up, and I'll scroll around for a second. But there's one resource in where I talked about writing things down. This this page here is a spreadsheet that's available to students, and I make some resources only available to students in their Google account because I want them to be in charge of it. Too often I make things just like wide open on the web. Parents get in here and start doing this for their kids. Again, go back and rewind this if you need to revisit that conversation. Okay, but I make this available to them, and really what this is, if you think of this like a college information scavenger hunt, it's a great way. And it's a spreadsheet that's empty, and I put across the top some important headers of details students might want to find about colleges that they're kind of like starting to move towards that I might apply to this college phase with. So it goes kind of from the more general and earlier on the process items on the left side, and as you scroll across, the headings at the top of that spreadsheet kind of follow along through students' either data gathering, application process, or final review process as they're going through. So it kind of takes them from the research, the application, to the review and committing phase of the whole process. So that's a wonderful tool that I would encourage people to kind of take advantage of. The other piece is here on the screen, and there's a number of things that students can do with relation to writing. All right, and it might be something that you choose to actually start formulating some responses. Maybe you're not there yet, but it's still good to start thinking about. Okay, because college applications and the writing components of those can be complicated. It asks very broad but sometimes difficult to answer types of questions, and we'll talk more about college writing in the fall as well. And I know that you will also in your English classes, but the UCs, for example, they have the same personal insight questions for next year. So you can actually get a head start and look up what are the personal insight questions for the UCs. You can hop onto the Common App and find out what are their general common application essay prompts. I would not place a whole lot of value in the school-specific responses at this point in the school year. Good chance they might be updating things on that end, but the common application has released that their application and their essay prompt are I believe the same, and if it's not, they've published it, but I'm pretty sure it's exactly the same. And then the University of California system is the exact same as well. So you can actually look those up. And maybe, like I said, you start writing, maybe you don't, but at least you start brainstorming and thinking about potential responses you might like to use to get through some of those things. There is some information that's available on the Common App in particular, because sometimes that is viewed as more of the in-depth and sometimes harder applications for students to complete. UCs and CSUs, apart from the writing on the UCs, CSUs has no writing, okay? No writing, no recommendation letter. CSU is probably one of the easier sides of the application, okay? It's pretty much entering academic information about yourself. The UCs, you add some of that, plus you add a short 4-prompt writing response to it and a little bit of extracurricular information, and that's pretty much that for that. There's no recommendation letters for the UCs. You get to the Common App, that's a little bit more broad and all-encompassing, where you have more long-form writing. You still do all the academic information, but you also start including things like letters of recommendation. Common App requires a letter from me, for example, as well as a school report and transcript. Many times it will either require or give you an opportunity to submit letter of recommendations from teachers as well. Okay, so you might want to start brainstorming and thinking about that too. For those letters, we do require that senior profile, and that's why getting a head start on that early is a great summer opportunity that's coming up. There are a number of other great resources, and I will be putting a link in the video description on YouTube and in the comment section of Facebook with a link to this presentation PDF, which will have these links that you can actually download, or you can simply pause the recording of this and write some of them down or plug them into your web browser. But these are also great resources. I am all for having useful and multiple sources. Okay, trusting all of your research to one source doesn't guarantee that all the information is as accurate as it could be. So it's good to check other things that are out there. And these are a few things. A lot of times students are also concerned about their majors. Towards the bottom of this, you see a website called mymajors.com. It's a great place to start thinking about what majors are out there, what might be right for me. Okay, so I want to make sure that you understand that piece. Before we get going, I'm actually going to hop over to our website here and let you actually kind of see a bit about what's going on with our website and a few other things for letting you do that. So let's see if we can get over there. So hopefully you're still hearing me on the stream here, but when you're up here, and this can go away, there are a few key things that I keep up to date here: booking appointments, APA information. All this stuff is dynamic and does update. For our conversation about college applications today, the main place that you'll probably find most things is going to be up here if you go underneath counseling support. And it'll look different on mobile, but all the menus are the same. And each of these items have some sub items over here, which you can click directly to. But they also have a main page, and I think sometimes people miss that. If you click on this item, what it's going to do, it's going to open up this new window. Okay, it actually has a FAFSA demonstration. It has some links, lists of college acceptances in the past. Okay, but these buttons are some of our more frequently used items. Okay, information about rankings and one particular school take on it. Qualities of college fit. This is actually a very powerful one that is also, so this Capex Fit Kit, that's that link that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, but this one is also awesome. All right, it provides a bunch of free, I think it's 6 free downloadable PDFs that lets you kind of like take a survey and understand more about your college interests and needs, okay? What you value, how much you know about yourself. It even has information about if you're going on college visits, okay? If you're going to use the summer, this is a great opportunity to print out and know what you're going to look for in that resource, all right? This is that spreadsheet that I showed you a picture of, okay, where you can actually click on it, the seniors can. This is a senior profile that seniors can actually download. There's cost estimators. There's also information that you can look for different search tools. The handbook that I mentioned earlier is over here, and you can find one for 2-year and 4-year colleges. All right, and I don't think, let's see if it'll pop up in mine. It's going to ask you to sign into Dropbox. We're going to try to skip that and see if I can show you, but it should be available. Okay, and this is a kind of an amalgamation of resources that you can scroll through. Clearly, it's a lot of reading. So if you're interested in more of the research side of things, this is a great resource that you can start with, as long as you don't get too overwhelmed with some of the, there's not a lot of pictures, all right? There's a lot of words. So if you're into that thing, that's for you, okay? But there's also a number of other things up here. For example, that YouTube page is all linked here on the home page. You can get some information about just our frequently used things, the YouTube page, our live page. If we have a meeting that you want to come to and have it streamed right on that YouTube page, that's fine too. So I would encourage you to take a few minutes and be able to watch and participate in some of these different items. But I do want to wrap us up for our time today. We're just over the hour mark, and I try to leave it at that. But I do want to thank you for watching. I want to highlight that I am available. This is the end of the school year for the 2020-2021 school year when this is being recorded. I do have time in the office for about the next week and a half. So my last day in the office will be the 23rd of June, and then I'll be out and then back typically mid-August. If you have stuff that comes up that you want to talk about, feel free. You can also make an appointment before the end of the school year. I'm happy to sit down and kind of brainstorm anything that you might have learned about yourself. But I do want to thank you for watching and participating. I'm looking forward to a more normal school year next year. It's exciting to be coming back to that. It's also a little confusing and being perfectly honest, like I'm a little not worried, but like anxious about it feels like a whole new experience and kind of like not sure what's going to happen and how it's going to feel and like, am I going to remember everything we need to do in person and all this other stuff that kind of goes through people's heads. But I want to thank you for watching. If you have stuff that you would like answers to or would like more information on, please let me know. Email me. You can leave a comment in the video or the link or the Facebook post below, and I'll be monitoring that as well. But again, we will be revisiting some of this stuff again because it's important in the fall, early fall timeframe at another session. But we will go into junior college information. We will also have another event on financial aid alone, so where we talk just about financial aid and applications and money and things like that. We'll be talking about trade and technical schools and have different things about that at a separate event. There's like I said, information overload coming your way, so bear with us. I want to wish you all a happy summer. Take the time to relax, but also use the time wisely, that you maybe have a few more minutes to yourself to not only rejuvenate yourself, which is an important thing, but also spend time kind of getting yourself prepared for the whirlwind that is going to be coming down the road in a couple months. So thank you. Have a great summer, and we'll see you in the next school year.